When security guard Marcus Chen started his night shift at the prestigious Whitmore estate, he expected nothing more than another quiet evening watching over dusty antiques and oil paintings. But the muffled sounds coming from the basement vault at 2:47 a.m. would shatter that expectation forever. What he discovered that night, and the dangerous game of deception that followed, would expose a web of lies spanning 3 generations, hidden fortunes worth millions, and a truth so explosive that powerful people would kill to keep it secret. Sometimes the most ordinary people stumble upon the most extraordinary secrets, and sometimes those secrets refuse to stay buried. Marcus Chen had been working security at the Whitmore estate for exactly 3 months when his life changed forever. The sprawling mansion on Beacon Hill had been converted into a private museum after the death of its owner, Eleanor Whitmore, 2 years earlier. Most nights passed without incident, just Marcus making his rounds through galleries filled with priceless art, antique furniture, and the lingering scent of old money. That Tuesday night in October started like any other. Marcus clocked in at 10 p.m., nodding to the day guard Jimmy Torres, who looked exhausted as usual. The estate employed minimal staff these days since Eleanor's death. Her adopted daughter, Victoria Whitmore Hayes, had inherited everything but seemed more interested in maintaining the family's reputation than actually visiting the place where she'd grown up.
After Chris and family...
Quiet night ahead, Jimmy said, gathering his things. The cleaning crew finished early. You've got the place to yourself until morning. Marcus settled into his routine, checking the main galleries first. The Whitmore collection was impressive. Paintings by minor masters, sculptures that cost more than most people made in a lifetime, and cabinets filled with jewelry and precious artifacts. Eleanor Whitmore had been a collector of fine things, though rumors around Boston suggested her wealth came from more than just wise investments. The mansion itself told stories through its architecture. Built in 1897 by Eleanor's grandfather, railroad baron Thomas Whitmore, it featured hidden passages, secret panels, and a basement vault that housed the family's most valuable possessions. Marcus had been given access to most areas but noticed that certain rooms remained locked, their keys held only by Victoria and the estate's lawyer, Harrison Blackwell. Around midnight, Marcus was reviewing security footage from the day when he noticed something odd. The cameras showed Victoria arriving that morning, but there was no record of her leaving. His supervisor had mentioned that she rarely stayed overnight anymore, preferring her penthouse downtown. Marcus made a note to check with the day shift but continued his rounds. The second floor held Eleanor's private quarters, left exactly as they were when she died. Marcus had always felt uncomfortable up there, not from any supernatural nonsense, but because of how perfectly preserved everything remained. Victoria had turned her mother's bedroom into something like a shrine, with fresh flowers delivered weekly, and Eleanor's clothes still hanging in the closet. As Marcus walked through the hallway lined with family portraits, he stopped at the painting of Thomas Whitmore. The old railroad baron stared down with calculating eyes that seemed to follow movement through the room. Local historians claim Thomas had built his fortune through questionable dealings with land acquisitions, often forcing small farmers to sell at unfair prices before railroad lines were announced publicly. The Whitmore family had spent generations trying to reshape that legacy into something more respectable. Eleanor herself had been an enigma. She'd adopted Victoria when the girl was 12, after Victoria's parents died in a car accident. The adoption had surprised Boston society because Eleanor had never shown interest in children, but she'd raised Victoria with the same attention she gave to her art collection. Carefully, expensively, and with high expectations. The grandfather clock in the main foyer chimed 1 a.m. as Marcus descended to the ground floor. He decided to check the basement vault, something he typically saved for later in his shift. The vault required 2 keys, one that Marcus carried, and another that remained in a locked box in the security office. The system seemed excessive for a museum that was rarely open to the public. Marcus retrieved the second key and made his way to the basement. The vault door was heavy steel, installed sometime in the 1940s when Eleanor's father ran the estate. Inside, temperature-controlled cases held the most valuable pieces of the collection, documents dating back to the railroad days, jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and several items that weren't listed in any public inventory. The vault always felt different from the rest of the house. While the upper floors maintained an atmosphere of elegant decay, the basement felt actively maintained, as if someone visited regularly. Tonight, that feeling was stronger than usual. Marcus noticed that dust patterns on some surfaces had been disturbed recently, and one of the document cases appeared to have been moved slightly. As he examined the case more closely, Marcus heard something that made him freeze. Footsteps overhead, deliberate and trying to be quiet. He checked his watch. 1:47 a.m. No one else should be in the building. Marcus quickly locked the vault and made his way upstairs, moving carefully to avoid making noise. The footsteps seemed to be coming from the second floor, near Eleanor's former quarters. Marcus climbed the main staircase slowly, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt. The estate's security system would have recorded any entry, but he'd learned that the Whitmore family had ways of circumventing their own security when necessary. At the top of the stairs, Marcus saw a faint light coming from Eleanor's study, a room that was supposed to remain locked. The door stood slightly ajar, and he could hear someone moving inside, opening and closing drawers with practiced efficiency. Marcus positioned himself where he could see into the room without being spotted. Victoria Whitmore Hayes stood behind her mother's desk, wearing dark clothing and latex gloves. She worked methodically through the desk drawers, examining documents before placing them into one of two boxes at her feet. Her movements suggested she knew exactly what she was looking for, and more importantly, that she'd done this before. Marcus watched as Victoria opened a hidden panel in the desk that he'd never known existed. She removed several items, what looked like old letters tied with ribbon, a small leather journal, and a manila envelope that appeared to contain photographs. She studied each item carefully before adding them to one of the boxes. What struck Marcus most was Victoria's demeanor. This wasn't someone frantically searching for something. This was someone systematically removing evidence. The careful way she handled each document, the methodical sorting, the professional-grade gloves, everything suggested a planned operation rather than a spontaneous decision. Victoria closed the hidden panel and moved to a filing cabinet that Marcus had always assumed was locked. She opened it easily and began removing files, photographing some pages with her phone before deciding whether to keep the originals. Several files went into her boxes while others were photographed and returned to their places. Marcus realized he was witnessing something significant, but he wasn't sure what. Was Victoria removing valuable items that weren't properly secured? Was she taking things that legally belonged to her anyway? Or was something more serious happening? Something that required this level of secrecy and careful documentation? His radio crackled softly with the automated security check from the monitoring company. Marcus quickly turned the volume down, but Victoria had heard it. She froze, listening carefully for several seconds before continuing her work with increased urgency. Marcus faced a difficult decision. His job was to protect the estate and its contents, but Victoria was the legal owner of everything inside. Still, her behavior seemed designed to hide her actions, and the methodical removal of documents felt wrong. He decided to document what he was seeing, using his phone to record video while remaining hidden. Victoria finished with the filing cabinet and moved to a bookshelf along the far wall. She removed several books, revealing another hidden compartment that contained what appeared to be financial records and correspondence. These items received the most careful attention. Victoria photographed every page before placing the documents in a separate envelope that went into a small fireproof bag. As Marcus continued recording, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Among the documents Victoria was photographing were what appeared to be death certificates, not just Eleanor's, but older ones dating back decades. She also spent significant time examining what looked like insurance policies and legal documents that she photographed extensively before returning to their hiding places. The pattern became clear to Marcus. Victoria was systematically documenting and selectively removing evidence of something that had happened in the past. The careful photography suggested she needed to maintain some records while removing others entirely. The fireproof bag indicated that some documents were valuable enough to require special protection. Victoria completed her work around 2:30 a.m. She carefully restored each hiding place to its original appearance, ensuring that casual observation wouldn't reveal that anything had been disturbed. The boxes of removed documents were consolidated into two briefcases that had been waiting by the door. Before leaving, Victoria made one final sweep of the room, using a small flashlight to check for any signs of her presence. Marcus remained hidden as Victoria left the study and made her way downstairs. He heard the soft beep of the security system being disarmed and reset. Victoria clearly knew all the codes and procedures. A few minutes later, he heard a car engine starting in the private driveway behind the estate, an exit route that wouldn't be visible from the main security cameras. After waiting another 20 minutes to ensure Victoria was truly gone, Marcus entered the study. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but knowing what to look for, he could see subtle signs that the room had been thoroughly searched. The hidden compartments were perfectly restored, but microscopic traces of dust had been disturbed, and the careful arrangement of items on the desk had been slightly altered. Marcus examined the areas where Victoria had found hidden panels and compartments. They were cleverly disguised and would be nearly impossible to locate without prior knowledge. This raised an important question. How did Victoria know about these hiding places? Had Eleanor shown them to her before she died? Or had Victoria discovered them through her own investigation? The implications were troubling. If Victoria was the rightful owner of everything in the house, why the secrecy? Why remove documents in the middle of the night while wearing gloves and using professional techniques to avoid leaving traces? Most importantly, why did some documents require complete removal while others only needed to be photographed? Marcus returned to the security office and began reviewing the footage from earlier that day. The cameras confirmed that Victoria had arrived that morning but showed no record of her leaving. Because she hadn't left. She'd been hiding in the house all day, waiting for the night shift when she could work undisturbed. This level of planning suggested that tonight's activities were part of a larger, ongoing operation. As Marcus reviewed more footage from previous weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. On several occasions, the cameras had experienced brief technical difficulties during late-night hours. Exactly the kind of controlled outages that would allow someone with knowledge of the security system to enter and exit undetected. Victoria had been conducting these midnight visits for months, possibly since her mother's death. Marcus faced an ethical dilemma that would define everything that happened next. He had evidence of activities that seemed designed to conceal information, but he wasn't sure if any laws were being broken. Victoria was the legal owner of the estate and its contents, giving her the right to remove anything she wanted. However, the secretive nature of her actions and the careful documentation of certain items before their removal suggested something more complex was happening. The clock in the security office showed 3:15 a.m. as Marcus made his decision. He would continue his normal duties for the rest of the night, but he would also begin his own investigation. Something important was hidden in the Whitmore family's past. Something significant enough that Victoria was willing to risk her reputation and break into her own house to control the evidence. Marcus copied his video recordings to a secure drive and locked it in his personal locker. He would need to learn more about the Whitmore family history, about Eleanor's death, and about what documents might be valuable enough to require this level of secrecy. He sensed that he'd stumbled onto something much larger than a simple case of an heir removing family documents. The rest of his shift passed quietly, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The Whitmore estate was no longer just a prestigious job watching over valuable art and antiques. It had become the center of a mystery that reached back through generations of one of Boston's most influential families. As dawn approached and the day shift arrived, Marcus maintained his normal routine. He filed his standard incident report, noting only that all security checks had been completed without unusual observations. But privately, he began planning his investigation into the Whitmore family secrets. Secrets that someone was desperately trying to keep buried. The morning sun streaming through the mansion's tall windows cast long shadows across the floors that Marcus had patrolled all night. Those shadows seemed different now, as if they were hiding truths that had remained concealed for far too long. Marcus Chen had signed up to protect the Whitmore estate, but he was about to discover that the estate's greatest threats might come from within the family itself. Marcus Chen spent the next 3 days researching the Whitmore family history, using his days off to visit the Boston Public Library and search through old newspaper archives. What he discovered painted a picture of a family whose public image had been carefully crafted to hide a much darker reality. The Whitmore fortune had indeed begun with Thomas Whitmore's railroad investments in the late 1800s, but the methods he'd used were far more questionable than family legends suggested. Marcus found records of several lawsuits filed against Thomas for fraud, coercion, and what would now be considered insider trading. Most of these cases had been settled out of court or dismissed under suspicious circumstances. Thomas's son, Eleanor's father, Charles Whitmore, had continued the family tradition of legally questionable business practices. During the 1920s and 1930s, Charles had been investigated for tax evasion, money laundering, and connections to organized crime figures who controlled Boston's shipping industry. Again, the cases never went to trial, suggesting that the Whitmore family had significant influence over local law enforcement and judicial systems. Eleanor herself had inherited not just wealth but also the family's talent for avoiding legal consequences. Marcus discovered that she'd been investigated multiple times for insurance fraud, particularly involving valuable art pieces that had been reported stolen and later mysteriously recovered. The pattern suggested a sophisticated operation designed to inflate insurance claims while maintaining possession of the actual items.
Most disturbing was what Marcus learned about Eleanor's adoption of Victoria. The girl's parents, Sarah and Michael Hayes, had died in what was officially ruled a car accident, but Marcus found newspaper reports suggesting that investigators had questioned the circumstances.
The Hayes family had been involved in a bitter legal dispute with Eleanor over a piece of land that contained valuable mineral rights. The adoption had taken place just 6 months after their deaths, giving Eleanor control over Victoria's inheritance from her biological parents. Marcus realized that Victoria might not be just an heir protecting family secrets, she might be a victim trying to uncover the truth about her own parents' deaths. This possibility changed everything about what he'd witnessed that night in Eleanor's study. Victoria might have been collecting evidence rather than destroying it. Determined to learn more, Marcus decided to approach Victoria directly. He waited until Thursday evening when she typically visited the estate to handle administrative matters. Rather than hiding his knowledge, he would be honest about what he'd seen and offer to help if she was investigating something important. Victoria arrived at 6 p.m., using the main entrance this time. Marcus met her in the foyer, noting how different she appeared in daylight wearing professional attire compared to the shadowy figure he'd observed working secretly in her mother's study. "Miss Whitmore Hayes, I need to speak with you about something important." Marcus began carefully. "I saw you in the house the other night going through documents in your mother's study. I'm not reporting it because I think you might be investigating something that someone else wants to keep hidden." Victoria's reaction surprised him. Instead of anger or denial, she looked relieved, as if she'd been waiting for someone to notice what she was doing. After studying Marcus for a long moment, she made a decision that would draw him into a conspiracy spanning 3 generations. "Follow me," she said simply, leading him to Eleanor's study. Once inside with the door locked, Victoria revealed the true scope of what she'd discovered. The documents she'd been collecting weren't just family records. They were evidence of a systematic pattern of fraud, murder, and cover-ups that stretched back to the 1890s. The Whitmore family fortune was built on crimes that had been carefully concealed through bribery, intimidation, and elimination of witnesses. "My biological parents discovered something about the mineral rights on their land," Victoria explained, opening one of the hidden compartments Marcus had seen her access. "They found evidence that Eleanor's grandfather had fraudulently acquired dozens of properties using inside information about railroad development and mineral deposits. My parents were going to expose everything when they died." Victoria showed Marcus documents that proved Thomas Whitmore had systematically cheated small landowners by purchasing their properties at low prices, just before announcing railroad developments that would make the land extremely valuable. When landowners refused to sell, they often suffered mysterious accidents or disappeared entirely. Charles continued the pattern, Victoria continued, revealing financial records from the 1920s and 1930s. He was involved with organized crime figures who helped him acquire properties through intimidation and violence. When legitimate business owners wouldn't sell, their businesses would burn down or they'd have fatal accidents. The documentation was extensive and damning. Marcus saw insurance policies that had been fraudulently claimed, death certificates that showed suspicious patterns, and financial records proving that the Whitmore family had profited from dozens of crimes over nearly a century. Eleanor was the worst of them all, Victoria said, her voice filled with barely controlled anger. She perfected the system. When she wanted something someone else owned, she would arrange for them to have problems, financial difficulties, legal troubles, or sometimes worse. Then she would step in as a helpful neighbor and acquire what she wanted at a fraction of its value. Marcus examined photographs of Eleanor's victims, families who had lost their homes, business owners who had been forced into bankruptcy, and individuals who had died under circumstances that authorities never properly investigated. The scope of the crimes was staggering, made possible by the family's growing wealth and influence. The art collection isn't just valuable pieces, Victoria revealed, opening another compartment. Many of the paintings and sculptures were stolen from Jewish families during World War II. Eleanor bought them from Nazi collaborators knowing they were stolen. She's been collecting blood money for decades. The stolen art revelation explained the extensive security around the collection and why certain pieces weren't listed in public inventories. Eleanor had been displaying and enjoying artwork that had been torn from families during one of history's darkest periods. Victoria explained that she'd been investigating her family's crimes for 2 years, ever since discovering a letter from her biological mother hidden in her childhood bedroom. The letter revealed that Sarah Hayes had uncovered evidence of Thomas Whitmore's land fraud and was planning to expose the entire family when she died. Eleanor arranged my parents' car accident, Victoria said with certainty. She wanted the mineral rights on their land, but more importantly, she wanted to eliminate the threat they posed to the family's reputation. Adopting me gave her control over any evidence my parents might have hidden. Marcus realized that Victoria had been conducting a dangerous double life. Publicly, she maintained her role as Eleanor's grateful adopted daughter, managing the estate and preserving the family's respectable image. Privately, she'd been systematically documenting evidence of crimes that could destroy the Whitmore reputation and potentially result in criminal charges. Why haven't you gone to the police? Marcus asked. Victoria's laugh was bitter. With what evidence? Eleanor was careful to only keep the most damaging documents hidden where no one would find them. She destroyed most of the direct evidence years ago. What I've been collecting proves the pattern, but it's not enough for criminal prosecution. The statute of limitations has expired on most of the crimes and the victims are dead. Marcus understood the dilemma. Victoria had enough evidence to expose the family's criminal history, but not enough to seek legal justice for the victims. She was trapped between wanting to honor her biological parents' memory and maintaining the life Eleanor had provided for her. There's something else, Victoria continued, revealing a manila envelope Marcus recognized from her midnight visit. Eleanor left instructions for what should happen to the evidence if she died. She wanted me to destroy everything to protect the family legacy. But I found out that's not the only copy. The envelope contained correspondence between Eleanor and Harrison Blackwell, the estate's lawyer, revealing that Blackwell had been helping Eleanor conceal evidence for decades. More importantly, the letters suggested that Blackwell maintained his own copies of the most damaging documents as insurance against Eleanor. Blackwell has been blackmailing my family for years, Victoria explained. He helped cover up the crimes in exchange for generous legal fees and a share of the profits. Now that Eleanor is dead, he's been pressuring me to continue paying him to keep the secrets buried. Marcus saw the complete picture now. Victoria wasn't just dealing with historical crimes. She was being actively extorted by someone who had evidence that could destroy her life.
The Midnight document collection wasn't about hiding evidence. It was about finding leverage against Blackwell before he demanded more than she could afford to pay.
I need proof of what Blackwell has been doing, Victoria said.
If I can expose his role in the cover-ups, I can destroy his credibility and make his evidence worthless. But his office security is better than anything here at the estate. Marcus realized that Victoria was asking for his help with what amounted to breaking into Blackwell's law office. The ethical implications were complex. They would be committing crimes to expose other crimes, but the victims of the original crimes deserved justice, even decades later. Victoria sensed his hesitation. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the first person who's discovered what's happening and offered to help instead of demanding money to stay quiet. Blackwell has contacts throughout Boston's legal system. If I try to expose him through official channels, he'll destroy the evidence and disappear. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the estate's main driveway. Victoria quickly closed the hidden compartments and moved to the window. A black sedan was parked outside, and two men in expensive suits were walking toward the front entrance. Blackwell. Victoria whispered, her face pale. He wasn't supposed to come until next week. Marcus heard the front doorbell ring, followed by the sound of someone using a key to enter without waiting for an answer. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer as the men made their way toward Eleanor's study. Victoria grabbed Marcus's arm. There's a service staircase behind the kitchen. We need to leave now, before they find us together. As they moved quickly through the mansion's back corridors, Marcus could hear the men searching Eleanor's study with professional efficiency. They weren't just looking for documents. They were looking for evidence that someone else had been there first. Victoria led Marcus out through a rear exit that connected to the estate's gardens. Once they were safely away from the house, she explained that Blackwell had been monitoring the estate's security systems remotely, probably noticing unusual activity patterns that suggested someone had been accessing areas they shouldn't. He knows I've been collecting evidence, Victoria said. Tonight was probably his last chance to remove anything that could implicate him before I found enough leverage to fight back. Marcus realized that the situation had become immediately dangerous. Blackwell clearly had resources and connections that Victoria couldn't match in a direct confrontation. If they were going to expose his blackmail operation and the decades of covered-up crimes, they would need to be smarter and more careful than their opponents. I have a security contact who might be able to help, Marcus offered. Someone who specializes in corporate investigations and has experience with cases involving historical fraud. But we'll need to move quickly before Blackwell realizes how much you know.
Victoria nodded, understanding that her 2-year investigation had reached a critical point. Either they would find enough evidence to expose the truth and end Blackwell's blackmail, or they would become the next victims in a pattern of violence that had lasted for more than a century.
As they watched from the gardens, more lights came on in the mansion as Blackwell's men conducted their search. Marcus and Victoria had crossed a line from which there would be no return. They were now active participants in a conspiracy that had already claimed multiple lives, and their only protection was their ability to expose the truth.
before someone decided they knew too much. Marcus's contact was Detective Sarah Mitchell, a former Boston police officer who now worked as a private investigator specializing in cold cases and corporate fraud. Marcus had met her during a security training program, and he knew she had experience with cases involving powerful families who used wealth and influence to avoid accountability.
2 days after their escape from the estate, Marcus and Victoria met Sarah at a small cafe in Cambridge, far from anywhere they might be recognized. Sarah listened carefully as Victoria explained the scope of the Whitmore family's crimes and Blackwell's ongoing blackmail operation.
"This is bigger than just historical fraud," Sarah said after reviewing copies of the documents Victoria had collected.
If what you're telling me is true, Blackwell isn't just covering up past crimes, he's been actively facilitating new ones.
Money laundering, tax evasion, and possibly accessory to murder. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on everything.
Sarah explained that while the original crimes from the early 1900s were beyond prosecution, Blackwell's decades-long cover-up operation constituted ongoing criminal activity. His blackmail of Victoria and his role in concealing evidence made him vulnerable to current charges.
"We need to get inside his office and document his files," Sarah continued. "But more importantly, we need to catch him in the act of extortion. If we can record him demanding money to keep secrets buried, we'll have enough evidence to bring down his entire operation." The plan Sarah proposed was complex and dangerous.
Victoria would schedule a meeting with Blackwell, claiming she wanted to negotiate a final payment to end their arrangement. During the meeting, she would wear a recording device and try to get Blackwell to explicitly describe the crimes he'd been covering up and the payments he expected to continue hiding them.
Meanwhile, Marcus would use his security expertise to gain access to Blackwell's office building during the meeting. Sarah had contacts who could provide him with equipment to copy computer files and photograph documents without leaving evidence of their presence.
"The timing has to be perfect," Sarah warned. "Blackwell is paranoid and sophisticated.
If he suspects he's being recorded or that his office has been compromised, he'll destroy everything and disappear. We only get one chance. We only get one chance."
Victoria agreed to the plan despite its risks. She'd been living under Blackwell's threats for 2 years, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. Either they would expose him now, or she would spend the rest of her life paying for crimes committed by people she'd never met. Marcus spent the next week studying the layout of Blackwell's office building, a renovated historical structure in Boston's financial district. The building had modern security systems, but Marcus identified several vulnerabilities that could be exploited during specific time windows when security shifts changed. Sarah arranged for specialized equipment, cameras small enough to photograph documents quickly, devices to copy computer hard drives, and recording equipment that would capture clear audio even in difficult acoustic environments. She also provided backup plans in case something went wrong during the operation. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 p.m., when most of the office building would be empty but security would still be minimal. Victoria arrived first, wearing the recording device Sarah had provided and carrying a briefcase containing what appeared to be financial documents. Blackwell's office reflected his position as one of Boston's most successful attorneys. Expensive furniture, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor created an atmosphere of wealth and power. But Victoria noticed details that suggested Blackwell's success came from more than legal fees, surveillance equipment, multiple phone lines, and a safe that appeared to contain documents rather than just valuables. "Victoria, thank you for coming," Blackwell said, gesturing to a chair across from his massive mahogany desk. "I trust you've given serious consideration to our discussion about your ongoing obligations to preserve your family's reputation." Blackwell was a tall, thin man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of polished appearance that inspired confidence in wealthy clients. But Victoria had learned to see past the surface presentation to the calculating intelligence that had helped him orchestrate decades of criminal cover-ups. "I want to end this arrangement," Victoria said directly. "I'm prepared to make one final payment, but I need to know exactly what you'll be keeping confidential, and what assurance I have that this will truly be the end." Blackwell smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, my dear. The Whitmore family legacy requires ongoing protection. Your grandmother's activities, your grandfather's business practices, even the circumstances surrounding your biological parents' deaths, these are matters that require permanent vigilance." As Blackwell spoke, Marcus was making his way through the office building's service corridors. Sarah's planning had been excellent. The security shift change created a 15-minute window during which the loading dock area was unmonitored. Marcus had entered through a maintenance access and was now making his way to Blackwell's floor using building blueprints Sarah had obtained. "Let's be specific," Victoria pressed. knowing she needed Blackwell to describe his crimes explicitly for the recording to be useful. What exactly did my family do that requires this level of protection? Blackwell opened a file cabinet and removed several folders, apparently deciding that Victoria needed to understand the full scope of what he'd been concealing. Your great-grandfather Thomas murdered at least 12 people to acquire their properties.
Your grandfather Charles was involved in organized crime activities that resulted in numerous deaths. And Eleanor arranged the murders of your biological parents to prevent them from exposing the family's criminal history.
Marcus reached Blackwell's office floor and quickly located the law firm's main suite. The door locks were electronic, but Sarah had provided him with a device that could clone access cards from the building's security system.
Within minutes, Marcus was inside the offices, making his way toward Blackwell's private office. Eleanor also maintained extensive files on local politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials. Blackwell continued, apparently enjoying Victoria's shock at the scope of the crimes.
She had evidence of their corruption, which she used to ensure favorable treatment whenever legal issues arose. I've continued that tradition, which is why your family has never faced serious investigation.
Victoria realized that Blackwell's blackmail operation extended far beyond the Whitmore family. He'd been using Eleanor's corruption files to control Boston's legal system for decades, ensuring that certain cases were dismissed and certain investigations were never properly conducted.
Marcus found Blackwell's private office and immediately began photographing documents from the open file cabinet. The folders contained detailed records of bribes paid to officials, evidence of crimes committed by prominent Boston families, and financial records showing payments made to eliminate witnesses or evidence.
The stolen artwork alone is worth millions, Blackwell said, removing photographs from another folder. Eleanor acquired pieces that were stolen from Holocaust victims, and I've been helping her maintain false provenance documents to legitimize their ownership. The current collection includes works that several international organizations are actively seeking to return to surviving family members. Victoria felt sick as she realized the full scope of her family's crimes. The Whitmore fortune wasn't just built on fraud and murder, it was actively profiting from some of history's greatest atrocities. Every expensive item in the estate, every comfortable moment of her childhood, had been purchased with blood money.
Marcus continued copying files, finding evidence that confirmed Victoria's suspicions about Blackwell's current activities. The lawyer had been systematically blackmailing dozens of wealthy Boston families, using information about their criminal activities to extract regular payments. The operation generated millions of dollars annually while ensuring that serious crimes never faced proper investigation. Your monthly payments aren't just buying my silence, Blackwell explained to Victoria. They're funding an entire system that protects Boston's most influential families from accountability. If you stop paying, I'll not only expose the Whitmore crimes, I'll reveal that you've known about them for years and chosen to benefit from them, rather than seek justice for the victims. Victoria understood the trap Blackwell had created. By accepting Eleanor's inheritance and maintaining the family's respectable image, she'd become complicit in covering up the crimes. Even if she wanted to expose the truth now, Blackwell could present her as an accomplice rather than a victim.
How much do you want to end this?
Victoria asked, hoping to get Blackwell to specify an amount that would clearly constitute extortion. End it? Blackwell laughed. My dear, this will never end. Your family has committed crimes that affect thousands of people over more than a century. The ongoing cover-up requires constant maintenance, continued payments to officials, and regular elimination of evidence that surfaces. You'll pay me $50,000 monthly for the rest of your life, and your heirs will continue the arrangement after you're gone. Marcus had heard enough. He'd been listening to the conversation through the recording device Sarah had provided, and Blackwell's explicit description of extortion gave them everything they needed for criminal charges. But as he prepared to leave the office, Marcus noticed something that changed everything about their situation. Blackwell's computer was displaying surveillance footage from the Whitmore estate, live feeds from cameras that were supposedly under Victoria's control.
Blackwell had been monitoring the estate continuously, tracking Victoria's movements and probably recording her midnight document collection sessions.
Worse, the computer showed that Blackwell had access to surveillance systems throughout Boston, including police headquarters, the district attorney's office, and federal law enforcement buildings. His blackmail operation wasn't just targeting wealthy families. He'd been spying on the officials who were supposed to investigate and prosecute crimes. Marcus quickly photographed the surveillance displays before copying the computer's hard drive. The evidence he was gathering would expose a corruption network that reached the highest levels of Boston's legal and political systems.
In Blackwell's office, Victoria was learning the true scope of the trap she'd inherited. The beauty of the system Eleanor created is that it's self-perpetuating. Blackwell explained.
Every family that pays to keep their secrets buried becomes invested in maintaining the system. Every official who accepts payment to ignore certain cases becomes vulnerable to exposure themselves. Everyone has too much to lose to ever reveal the truth. Victoria realized that exposing Blackwell wouldn't just destroy one corrupt lawyer. It would bring down an entire network of criminals who had been protecting each other for decades. The political and legal consequences would reshape Boston's power structure, but it might also put Victoria and Marcus in extreme danger from desperate people with nothing left to lose. I need time to consider your terms, Victoria said, hoping to end the meeting before Blackwell became suspicious. Of course, Blackwell replied smoothly, but don't take too long. Other parties have expressed interest in acquiring certain pieces of your art collection, particularly items with questionable ownership history. It would be unfortunate if those parties had to pursue more aggressive collection methods. The threat was clear. If Victoria didn't continue paying, Blackwell would not only expose the family crimes, but would also arrange for valuable items to be stolen, or for Victoria herself to have an accident. She was trapped in the same system that had destroyed her biological parents and countless other victims over the past century. As Victoria left Blackwell's office, Marcus was completing his evidence collection and preparing to escape the building. They gathered enough material to expose the corruption network, but they'd also learned that fighting Blackwell would be far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. Their investigation had revealed that they weren't just facing one corrupt lawyer. They were challenging an entire criminal organization that had infiltrated Boston's most powerful institutions. The final phase of their plan would require careful coordination and perfect timing.